Columns of warriors march westward across the endless steppes, their armor gleaming in the rising sun. Their steel, forged in furnaces whose secrets predate the rise of Gondor, rings with each disciplined step. These are the Easterlings, and their arrival heralds doom for the kingdoms of the West. But why would such proud peoples, with histories and empires of their own, march under the banner of Mordor? The answer lies in forgotten stories that would shake the foundations of everything the West believes about their greatest enemies. Under the sun, men awakened in Hildórien amid a world of wonder. While their western kindred would soon find guidance from the elves, these eastern tribes faced the mysteries of Middle-earth alone. The other Valar stayed distant in their western realm, but Morgoth, mightiest of the Valar and first Dark Lord, came to these peoples. He alone would walk among the first awakened men of the East. In some lands, he took form as a shadow commanding the construction of great temples. In others, their first rulers heard whispers of conquest and glory guiding their hands. These newly awakened peoples, seeing such power from Morgoth and knowing nothing of the wars in the West, beheld only majesty beyond measure. To Hildórien there came no Valar to guide men, or to summon them to dwell in Valinor, and men have feared the Valar rather than loved them, and have not understood the purposes of the powers, being at variance with them, and at strife with the world. But it was said afterwards among the Eldar that when men awoke in Hildórien at the rising of the sun, the spies of Morgoth were watchful, and tidings were soon brought to him. And this seemed to him so great a matter that secretly under shadow he himself departed from Angband and went forth into Middle-earth, leaving to Sauron the command of the war. Under Morgoth's dominion, the first Eastern empires took shape through blood and iron. In the lands around the inland seas, their smiths learned to forge weapons of war. Across the grasslands, they bred horses for battle. In the river valleys, they built mighty fortresses. No records in the West tell how much came from the Dark Lord, but Morgoth's influence ran deep. Tribes would cast out their own children for refusing to bow before his temples, and kings would sacrifice much more to prove their loyalty to the Dark Lord. Then came the War of Wrath in the First Age, when the Valar themselves marched from the west to end Morgoth's reign. The very foundations of Middle-earth shook as divine powers clashed. Beleriand sank beneath the waves. Morgoth's fortress of Angband was torn down. The Dark Lord who had dominated Middle-earth was dragged in chains before the judgment of the Valar, cast into the void beyond the world. But darkness lingered in the east. While the west celebrated victory, eastern lands remained isolated. In hidden valleys, his followers preserved secret knowledge passed down through generations. Ancient songs still spoke of him giving them the first fire. When tales of his evil reached them from the west, many eastern peoples met these stories with mistrust. The west spoke of a demon tyrant, but eastern legends painted him as the first to notice their people, the one who taught them to survive when the Valar remained silent. And so the eastern people continued teaching their children to honor the one who had given their ancestors the tools of civilization, unmoved by the news from the west. As the Second Age dawned and the world rebuilt from catastrophe, another power arose from Morgoth's defeat: Sauron, most cunning of Morgoth's servants. After fleeing to Middle-earth, he established his realm in Mordor around year 1000 of the Second Age. From there, he turned his gaze eastward, where he found peoples who had developed in isolation from Western influence. Their mistrust of the West gave him the opening he sought. Sauron would now seize the opportunity to position himself as Morgoth's rightful heir and the true divine patron of the East. Along the shores of the inland sea, Sauron built magnificent temples that merged the ancient worship of Morgoth with his own dark liturgies. These vast structures of black stone and gold rose like mountains from the coastal plains, their spires wreathed in perpetual smoke from sacrificial fires. Within their shadowed halls, priests maintained traditions dating back to the First Age, burning offerings before obsidian altars, chanting hymns in the black speech that Morgoth himself had taught their ancestors. Sauron would carefully preserve many older rites while subtly redirecting their devotion toward himself. Eastern architects who pledged fealty to Sauron mastered the art of constructing soaring towers under his guidance, though their heights did not quite match the grandeur of Numenor's works. Their smiths, granted access to ancient secrets of metalcraft, produced arms and armor that were both formidable and awe-inspiring. Each gift of knowledge and power that Sauron bestowed further bound these peoples to his cause, while simultaneously expanding his own power for the coming conflicts with the West. Some kingdoms would submit to his will out of fear, others were drawn by promises of conquest and riches, while many simply mistrusted the distant West that had never shown interest in their lands. Yet all found themselves bound in a web of mutual benefit. The Easterlings gained strength, knowledge, and guidance they had long sought, while Sauron acquired devoted armies and secure territories for his future campaigns against the West. In this way, the Dark Lord transformed the ancient shadow of Morgoth into a foundation for his own dominion, building an empire that served both his immediate needs and his long-term ambitions. Around 1800 of the Second Age, Numenor, the mightiest kingdom of men blessed by the Valar, began colonizing eastward along the coasts of Middle-earth. As Numenorian ships claimed harbors and their armies demanded tribute from coastal peoples, Sauron dispatched his servants eastward. They would infiltrate cities to teach defensive tactics, while supervising the construction of mighty seawalls and fortifications. In the field, his most skilled commanders would train the eastern armies in ways to counter the dreaded Numenorian cavalry charge. The great harbors of Numenor's eastern colonies became battlegrounds for this growing conflict. Eastern armies, equipped with Sauron's weapons and tactics, launched raids against colonial outposts. Trading ships found themselves caught between rival powers. Some colonies faced complete isolation as Eastern forces cut their supply lines. This constant pressure forced Numenor to commit more resources to defending their eastern territories, straining their empire's capabilities. Far in the western seas, Numenor reigned as the mightiest kingdom of men. In 3261 of the Second Age, its last king, Ar-Pharazôn, marched into Middle-earth to challenge Sauron's growing power. The Dark Lord surrendered without battle, calculating his moves carefully. Middle-earth breathed a moment of peace as Sauron was taken in chains across the sea. In Middle-earth, Sauron's apparent defeat changed little in the east. His most powerful servants, the Nazgûl, maintained his dominion from their fortress of Minas Morgul. Eastern temples continued their dark rites. Trade routes he had established still flowed. His armies remained armed and ready. The machinery of his empire continued to turn, awaiting his return. Yet in Numenor, their victory carried poison at its heart. Sauron's whispers corrupted the king's mind, turning pride to madness until Ar-Pharazôn dared to challenge the gods themselves. Divine wrath answered in 3319. Numenor sank beneath the waves, taking Sauron's physical form with it. From the ruin of Numenor, Sauron's spirit fled back to Middle-earth, reforming in his eastern strongholds where his power ran deepest. The western kingdoms foundered in chaos, their greatest realm destroyed, their colonies cut off, their power shattered. Among the survivors, many Numenorians who had embraced Sauron's teachings now turned fully to his service, their hatred of the Valar burning even hotter after their homeland's destruction. These Black Numenorians, as they would come to be known, brought their advanced knowledge and burning vengeance to Sauron's cause. Chief among them would rise the one known only as the Mouth of Sauron, a sorcerer lord who entered the service of Barad-dûr and became Sauron's most dreadful herald. Sauron's priests and Black Numenorian followers stepped forward to guide abandoned settlements. His commanders offered protection to isolated outposts. Former colonial governors, faced with extinction, pledged loyalty to Eastern lords who promised survival, finding common cause in their resentment of the West and its gods. Sauron's grasp over the East strengthened with each passing year. New fortresses rose along his borders, their walls built by architects he had trained and enhanced by Numenorian engineering. Armies gathered in vast training grounds, learning tactics he had perfected over millennia. Caravans moved between his territories, binding distant kingdoms into a single empire. In every major city, dark temples rose, their ancient rituals now dedicated to the Dark Lord's glory. Ceremonies made even more potent by the dark knowledge the Black Númenóreans brought with them. His forces now waged relentless campaigns across Middle-earth. Eastern armies struck deep into the territories of those who resisted Sauron's rule. They besieged the great fortresses of the Misty Mountains, while their raiders pressed westward toward the shores of Lindon. The fighting never truly ceased. When major armies withdrew, smaller bands continued their attacks, wearing down resistance through years of constant warfare. Cities that surrendered were absorbed into Sauron's empire. Those that resisted were razed, their populations scattered or enslaved. This grinding war of attrition continued until the West finally united in desperate alliance against the growing threat. In 3434 of the Second Age, the largest army since the War of Wrath assembled under Gil-galad and Elendel's leadership. The combined forces of the Noldor from Lindon, the Sindar, the armies of Arnor and Gondor, and dwarves from Khazad-dûm marched east to challenge Sauron's dominion. On the plains of Dagorlad, before Mordor's gates, they clashed with Sauron's full strength. Legions of orcs, trolls, and evil men, anchored by his elite Easterling forces. Sauron himself entered the fight, striking down both Gil-galad, last High King of the Noldor, and Elendil, whose sword Narsil shattered as he fell. Victory came only when Isildur, using his father's broken blade, cut the One Ring from Sauron's hand, destroying his physical form. The defeat of Sauron at Dagorlad scattered his eastern armies. As the Dark Lord's ring was taken and his power diminished, his eastern followers split into two factions. Some retreated into the shadows. In hidden valleys and mountain fortresses, they maintained their loyalty. These temples continued their rites in secret caves, while warriors passed down his teachings in remote training grounds. They waited, remembered, and prepared for the day their Lord would return. But some saw an opportunity in chaos. As the Third Age dawned, these former servants of Sauron fought for power across the eastern realms. Tales spoke of the great fortresses that once proudly displayed Sauron's banners became prizes in their wars, their shadows stretching across lands torn by internal strife. In the southern kingdoms, generals who had once commanded Sauron's armies fought amongst themselves for territory. Tribal chiefs who had once served the Dark Lord now led burning raids against their former temples, pulling down black stone and melting golden idols into war treasure. Yet even as civil war raged, Sauron's influence persisted in subtle ways. The great roads he had built still connected the eastern cities, their black stones worn smooth by trade caravans. Those cultists who had chosen loyalty over power continued their vigils, preserving ancient texts and weapons, passing down secret knowledge through carefully chosen apprentices. Their hidden temples burned offerings before obsidian altars, though now they did so in caves and remote valleys, rather than towering edifices. Into this fractured landscape stepped the Blue Wizards, Alatar and Palando. Some said they first appeared in the east during the early Third Age, though other chronicles spoke of their presence as far back as the middle years of the Second Age. Not much was known about them, but wherever they traveled, they stirred up doubts and hope. These mysterious mages worked in ways far different from their Western counterpart. Instead of rallying great armies or advising kings directly, they moved in subtlety. It's said the Blue Wizards established networks of informants throughout Eastern courts, spreading discord between allied kingdoms. They would reveal secret plots to rival powers, or ensure that tribute meant for one ruler would mysteriously appear in another's treasury. When ambitious generals planned to unite multiple armies, convenient disputes over ancient territorial claims would suddenly reignite. In the northern steppes, the wizards taught these tribes new songs that subtly countered the dark rituals still practiced in secret by Sauron's followers. Where the old hymns spoke of Morgoth bringing first fire, these new verses told of stars that had burned since before the Dark Lord's coming. The Blue Wizards also shared military knowledge with these tribes, not enough to make them a threat to the west, but sufficient to resist being absorbed into larger Eastern empires. In 2460 of the Third Age, dark smoke began to rise from Dol Guldar's towers. Word spread through the eastern lands. A power had returned. The faithful who had hidden in mountain caves for centuries recognized their lord's presence. From their secret temples, they brought forth ancient artifacts and weapons preserved since the First Age. Armed with these tokens of their loyalty, they traveled from city to city, whispering to nobles and merchants of restored glory. In the great ports of Rhûn, merchants who had secretly maintained shrines to Sauron now openly displayed their allegiance. Their trading ships carried more than goods. They brought messages between awakening cells of followers. In Khand, the old temples that had stood empty for centuries filled again with the smoke of sacrifice as hooded priests resumed their ceremonies. Through the markets of every major city, Sauron's agents moved with newfound boldness, bribing and threatening officials and recruiting soldiers to their cause. Yet the Blue Wizards' work had taken root too deeply to be easily undone. Ancient rivalries, carefully nurtured over centuries by the wizards, made real military cooperation difficult. Kingdoms that might have marched together now kept troops in reserve, watching their neighbors with suspicion. Still, when Sauron sent his emissaries east in the Third Age, some kingdoms remembered their old loyalties. The Nazgûl and Sauron's herald rode forth from Minas Morgul, carrying their master's call to kingdoms that had kept faith through the long centuries. Within months, his most devoted realms answered. Their warriors marched westward, bearing weapons forged in ancient furnaces, their red armor catching the dawn light. Without question, they followed the presumed heir of the one who first taught their people to survive in darkness. On June 20th, 3018, these forces struck their first decisive blow. Sauron launched a carefully planned assault on Osgiliath, the ancient capital of Gondor that straddled the Anduin River. Easterling infantry, supported by Haradrim cavalry and the armies of Mordor, swept through the city's eastern districts. The garrison of Gondor, though valiant, found themselves overwhelmed not merely by numbers, but by a terrifying concentration of power they had never before encountered. Osgiliath fell, and with it, the last barrier between Mordor's armies and the plains of Gondor lay broken. But this very year, in the days of June, sudden war came upon us out of Mordor, and we were swept away. We were outnumbered, for Mordor has allied itself with the Easterlings and the cruel Haradrim. But it was not by numbers that we were defeated. A power was there that we have not felt before. March 3019 saw these forces descend upon Dale. The Easterling armies advanced toward Dale, their large infantry and cavalry formations overwhelming King Bran's defenses through sheer numbers and coordinated attacks. After forcing the defenders back and capturing the city of Dale, they pressed on to lay siege to the dwarven stronghold of Erebor. Yet these impressive forces represented only a fraction of the East's true military potential. The Blue Wizards' centuries of subtle manipulation ensured that for every kingdom sending troops to Sauron's cause, another remained neutral, watched by suspicious neighbors. The armies of the West never faced the full might of the East united, a force that, as in the Second Age, could have overwhelmed even the mighty walls of Minas Tirith. When the One Ring finally perished in Mount Doom, the Easterling armies at the Morannon faced a choice centuries in the making. Some fought to the death, their loyalty to ancient oaths unbending. Others laid down their arms, seeing in Sauron's fall an echo of the very changes the Blue Wizards had long worked to inspire. As these armies withdrew eastward, they carried with them questions that would reshape their societies. What aspects of their civilization were truly their own? What had been Morgoth's teachings, and what had they developed themselves? The answers would determine the East's path into the Fourth Age. In the aftermath, the Eastern realms splintered. The great armies that had marched west now turned homeward, their unity broken. Centuries of development had been shaped by Sauron's hand. The very foundations of their society, built first by Morgoth and refined by Sauron, lay exposed. As the Fourth Age dawned, these proud peoples faced the monumental task of rebuilding their identity and culture from fragments of what remained. This legacy poses uncomfortable questions for the West's understanding of their own history. Were the Easterlings truly corrupted, or did they make rational choices based on their experiences? Their legacy shows us that in Middle-earth, as in all conflicts, one people's ancient ally could be another's age-old enemy, all shaped by histories that ran deeper than any current war.